Once you install terminal services, you will be given a 128-day trial period. In order to continue using terminal services after this period, you will need to buy licenses for it. These licenses are called Terminal Services Client Access Licenses, or TS-CALs. Terminal Services comes with two types of CALs. The first is Device CAL. When a device connects up to terminal services, a temporary license is issued. When the same device connects up to terminal services for the second time, a permanent license is allocated to that device and uses one of the per-device CALs. Next you have per-user CALs. These CALs allow a user to access terminal services from any number of different devices. With this license, you need to make sure that you have purchased one license for each user that is connecting to terminal services. Per-user CALs are not enforced by terminal services licensing, so you could have more users connected to terminal services than you have licenses. You can determine the number of per-user CALs in use through the Terminal Services Licensing Manager. If you do not have enough per-user CALs, you should purchase more, otherwise you are breaking your license agreement. The Terminal Services Licensing Server will remove device CALs from the server after a random period between 52 and 89 days. If the client reconnects after this period, it will simply get another device CAL issued. This means that if a device is removed from the network, you can be assured that its CAL will be reused at a later date by another device. If you run out of device CALs, you can revoke up to 20% of the in-use device CALs. This can be a real lifesaver if a computer dies and cannot be put back on the network. You can revoke the device CAL without having to wait the 52 to 89 days. Keep in mind that only 20% of the total can be revoked. A standard Windows CAL is not the same as a Terminal Services CAL. If you own any standard Windows CALs, you still need to buy Terminal Services CALs in order to use terminal services. The decision which CALs to purchase depends on your needs. If you have a small number of computers that a large number of users use, then you are best off buying per-device CALs. If you have a small number of users that use a lot of different computers, for example, users that travel around a lot, you are better off buying per-user CALs. After you install terminal services, you have a 128-day trial period. If you are not sure which CALs to buy, use the trial period to try and work out which users and devices are using terminal services. Once you purchase your CALs, you will need to add them to Terminal Services Licensing Manager. This role does not need to be added to the same server that has terminal services on it. The Terminal Services Licensing Manager is forest or domain-wide. It is up to you to decide which scope you want to set Terminal Services Licensing Manager up in. If it is forest-wide, then any client in the forest can detect and use it. Otherwise, only clients in the immediate domain will be able to detect and use Terminal Services Licensing Manager. Lastly, your new Terminal Services Licensing Manager needs to be activated with Microsoft. Once all this is done, your Terminal Services Licensing Manager is ready to issue CALs. Let's have a look how to install the Licensing Manager and activate it. Once you have decided which server to install the Licensing Manager on, you need to add it through the Server Manager. Open Server Manager from Administrative Tools and then select the roles from the right hand side. Click the option Add Roles. This server is my domain controller. It is not a bad choice for the Licensing Manager. However, you could also put it on a member server or a server with terminal services installed. Next you need to tick the role Terminal Services and press Next. Read the Terminal Services welcome page and press Next. Now I'm going to select TS Licensing to install Terminal Services Licensing Manager. Notice now that I can press Next without selecting any other roles. The Licensing Manager now would like to know if it will work at the domain level or the forest level. Since my install is a single forest single domain, I will leave it on the default setting of domain. Now to get the install going, all I need to do is press Install. Terminal Services Licensing Manager is now installed on this server. All I need to do now is close the wizards and run Terminal Services Licensing Manager from Administrative Tools under the Start menu. Before I can start adding CALs to my new licensing server, I need to activate it. To do this, right-click on the server and select Activate Server. The Activate wizard will appear. After the welcome screen, you can choose your activation method. If you have an internet connection, the easiest way is to leave it on automatic connection. However, If you are behind a firewall or on an isolated network, you may want to choose web browser or via the telephone. Keep in mind that when you add Terminal Services CALs, the licensing server will try to activate the Terminal Services CALs in the same manner. You can, however, change the method later on in the Terminal Services Licensing Server properties. Since I have an internet connection ready, I will select Automatic Connection. The license server will now locate the activation server and then prompt you for some more information. The first screen, you'll need to fill in all the fields. On the next screen, the fields are optional, so I will skip this one. The License Manager will now contact Microsoft and activate your server. You have the option to start the licensing wizard. The licensing wizard adds CALs to your licensing server. I will run the wizard now, but you can run it manually anytime you want. Read the licensing screen and move on. Now you can select the way you purchased your CALs. Once you have done that, press Next. From here, you can enter your licensing codes to install your CALs. Once done, they will be added to your server and ready to use. This concludes licensing. Make sure, whether you decide to use per device or per user CALs, that you license your terminal services correctly.